Well, thank you for joining us for Almost Persuaded. My name is Alan Hall, and I'm the pastor of Good News Free Will Baptist Church in York, Pennsylvania. If you have your Bibles, if you'll turn to 1 Samuel chapter 24. 1 Samuel chapter 24, and we're going to read one verse here, and verse 14 is our text verse. And let me just give you a little bit of background of what's taking place here. First of all, David, the Old Testament, is being chased by King Saul. Saul is still king at that time. Saul has with him some 3,000 armed men. And Saul is basically chasing David so that he can kill him. He thinks that David is his enemy. He thinks that David is a threat to him personally and to also his throne. And he's trying to wipe him off the face of the earth. And David is running from Saul. He's fleeing for his life. Now, David is not alone. David has with him a ragtag group of 600 men. These men were made up of basically fellows who were in debt, fellows who were in despair or distress, and some of them were in trouble or running from things even. But you can see the numbers just don't add up, do they? I mean, you got 600 men with David against 3,000 men with Saul. And so David is running for his life. And so David and his 600 men run inside of a cave. It must have been a pretty large cave. But he runs inside of a cave to hide there under the cover of darkness. Now, Saul doesn't know that David and his men are in the cave. And so Saul goes inside the cave by himself. Very dangerous situation. Now, again, under the cover of darkness, David sneaks up behind Saul. He takes his sword. He cuts a piece of Saul's robe off. And then he lets Saul go outside the cave. Now, David's men are telling him, kill him. Kill Saul. This is your opportunity. I mean, God has plopped him right in front of you, and you can take his life right now. All your troubles will be over. You won't have to run from him anymore. Kill him right now. And David says to them, notice in verse 6, he says, I'm not going to touch the Lord's anointed. God had ordained Saul to be king. And God had done that. And David, he took note of that, and he says, I'm not going to touch the Lord's anointed. And so he lets Saul escape here. But after Saul goes outside the cave, David goes outside, and he calls Saul's name, and he holds up that piece of robe, and Saul realizes what a predicament he was just in. He realizes the danger that he had just put his life in, and the fact that David had let him off the hook, so to speak. But then notice what David tells him in verse 14. He says, after whom is the king of Israel come out? After whom dost thou pursue? After a dead dog? After a flea? Now, you say, wow, that's a strange verse to take your text from. Well, hang with me, because this happens again in another chapter. Notice a couple chapters over, chapter 26. A very similar instance happens, a little different situation. But David here, still running from Saul. Saul didn't let David off the hook, even though David let him off the hook. He's still pursuing David, still trying to kill him. David's still running. But that evening, when Saul and his men settled down to sleep for the night, it must have been a pretty deep sleep, but David sneaks down into Saul's camp. And David goes over to where Saul is laying. He gets his cruse of water. He takes Saul's spear, and then he sneaks back out of camp, maybe up on the side of a hill, and then he calls Saul. He wakes him up. And Saul, when he wakes up, he realizes who it is. He recognizes David's voice. And then he sees in David's hand his spear and his cruse of water. And again, he realizes the danger. But notice what David says to him in verse 20. He says, now therefore let not my blood fall to the earth before the face of the Lord. For the king of Israel has come out to seek a flea. To seek a flea. I want to talk to you just for a few moments on a very simple subject, the danger of chasing fleas. You know, we're living in a society today that is majoring on chasing fleas. Even Christians such as myself, we have become so engrossed in the things that are insignificant. You see, I believe we're spending way much time on things that, well, let me just use a phrase that I heard over and over again growing up. Things that won't amount to a hill of beans when we get to eternity. You know, they're not going to matter when we get there, but we're spending so much time. And may the Lord help